Ninth chapter.
Copyright by Vincenzo C. 2025.
In the previous chapter, we left off at the moment when I was in command of the Carabinieri in Avellino, awaiting transfer to the military prison in Gaeta. The next day, at the crack of dawn around 7 in the morning, I was abruptly awakened. I dressed quickly, washed my face trying to shake off the anxiety that weighed on me, and mentally prepared myself for what would be a journey into the unknown. I was physically ready, but deep inside a profound unease lingered. I had no idea what awaited me. About half an hour later, 3 carabinieri arrived. Without much ado, they had me get into a car, and we set off towards Gaeta. We drove along the highway in a tense silence, broken only by the sound of the engine. After about 30 minutes, we stopped at a rest area. The carabinieri, in an unexpected gesture of humanity, bought a coffee and offered me one, along with a croissant. A small act of kindness that, in that moment of disorientation, deeply moved me. One thing you should know is that, as soon as I got into the car in Avellino, they had handcuffed me. But after a few kilometers, perhaps out of a sense of formal respect for the law, they removed them. The journey continued for about an hour and a half, and we finally arrived in Gaeta around 11. The prison loomed before me like an impregnable fortress, a place that seemed straight out of a dramatic movie. Massive iron gates, barred windows, and an oppressive atmosphere of control and surveillance. The guard opened the heavy gate, and I crossed that threshold alongside the carabinieri. I was taken to an office, where they removed the handcuffs that had been put back on me just before. The carabinieri handed me over to the guard who would take custody of my fate. I was stunned. A mix of fear, emotion, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. That colossal castle, transformed into a prison, left me breathless. Only later did I discover that it was an Angevin castle, a legendary and feared place in the military. It was a symbol of discipline and punishment, a deterrent used by superiors to intimidate. "I'll send you to Gaeta" was a phrase that echoed like a threat. And now, incredibly, I was there. After about 20 minutes, the carabinieri left. I was taken to an isolation cell, a claustrophobic and bare place. The guard, a man of few words, ordered me to remove my belt, shoelaces, and any object that could pose a danger. The cell was a black hole. No windows, no bathroom, just a thick darkness that seemed to swallow all hope. When the door closed behind the guard and I was left alone, I broke down in tears. Despair overwhelmed me. I never imagined I would be treated like that. I knew nothing about military laws, and it all felt like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. But that was only the beginning. Meals were passed to me through a small window in the door, the only contact with the outside world, the only ray of light in that perpetual darkness. Those 3 days dragged on with excruciating slowness. I had all the time to reflect, to ruminate, to convince myself that all of this was my fault. Then finally the door opened. After 72 hours of darkness and immobility, the intense light blinded me. I staggered, my legs giving way under the weight of weakness. A guard grabbed my arm, supporting me as he led me to a new cell, this time with other comrades, all conscientious objectors. In that new reality, I found a glimmer of humanity. I made friends with the guys I shared the cell with. Between outings in the castle courtyard, the stories we told each other about why we ended up there, card games, and improvised coffee made with rolled-up newspaper sheets, time began to pass a bit faster. But inside, a question continued to torment me. When would the day of the trial come? And more importantly, what sentence would I receive? After about 15 days, I was summoned to the prison commander's office. In a formal and detached tone, he informed me that the next day my trial would be held at the military court in Naples. At 7 in the morning, I was already ready for the journey that would determine my fate. 3 carabinieri took me into custody, and we set off for Naples. Around 9 we arrived at our destination. Before entering the court, they handcuffed me, which were removed only once I crossed the threshold of the courtroom. I felt disoriented and overwhelmed by fear when suddenly I sensed a familiar presence. I turned and saw my mother. I couldn't hold back my tears. I hugged her tightly, grateful that in such a crucial moment she hadn't abandoned me. She, in a reassuring voice, encouraged me, saying that everything would turn out fine. Those words infused me with some calm and gave me the strength to face what was about to happen. After a few minutes, the trial began. My mother, sitting beside me, continued to support me with her loving and encouraging gaze. The judge opened the hearing by calling the medical lieutenant, the one I had hit with a stool, to testify. To my great surprise, the lieutenant did not contradict my version of events, the one I had stated during the initial interrogation with the carabinieri. He confirmed that he had verbally attacked me without valid reason, offending my dignity and my homeland. He also admitted that he had overreacted, a gesture that perhaps helped mitigate my sentence. I was also questioned and answered all questions honestly, hiding nothing. At the end of my testimony, I approached the lieutenant and extended my hand in a gesture of reconciliation. I noticed that the judges observed that gesture with some astonishment, as if to underline the unexpected humanity of that moment. After retiring to the deliberation room, the judges returned to the courtroom after 15 minutes and read the verdict. For months of detention in Gaeta, solely for the crime of desertion. No sentence was given for the assault on the lieutenant, considered legitimate self-defense, albeit somewhat excessive. I was relieved. I had already served almost a month, so only 3 remained. As the carabinieri prepared to take me back to Gaeta, my mother stopped them in the lobby, asking to speak with me for a few minutes. Kindly, they removed the handcuffs and granted my mother 10 minutes, specifying that they too had obligations to fulfill. After those brief moments, I bid my mother an emotional farewell and followed the carabinieri to the car that would take me back to Gaeta. After a few hours of travel, we arrived at our destination. After the usual formalities, I was taken back to my cell. As soon as I returned, I informed my fellow inmates about the trial's outcome. They were surprised by the leniency of the sentence and expressed their relief at how things had turned out. That night, despite the bars and the cold of the cell, I managed to sleep with a sense of peace, aware that justice in some way had recognized my truth. After a few weeks, I was summoned again to the prison commander's office. In a calm but firm voice, he informed me that I had been chosen as a spazzino. Every day I would go out with the judge to help a marshal with grocery shopping. That news filled me with joy, an emotion I hadn't felt in a long time. I asked the commander, almost incredulous, why me? He looked at me with a sincere gaze and said that, given my mild, polite, and approachable nature, I was the right person for the task. I thanked him with gratitude, my heart pounding, and returned to my cell with a mix of excitement and hope. The next day, still dazed by my luck, the marshal was waiting for me to go out. Stepping outside the prison, even if only for a few hours, was like breathing the air of freedom again. That moment made me reconsider the goodness of humanity, a feeling I thought I had lost. After 2 months of detention, another unexpected news arrived. My sentence had been reduced to just 2 months. The next day I would leave the prison to return to my unit, the Lancieri di Novara Squadron Group, this time in Gorizia, where I would complete my military service. I was given a travel ticket, and that same evening I left, with a mix of relief and determination. I swore to myself that I would never do anything stupid again. The next morning I arrived in Gorizia, resumed my duties, and the 3 months passed quickly. At the end I was given my discharge papers, a travel ticket, and I returned home. Once there, I took off my uniform and returned to being who I had always been, a cheerful and carefree young man. This story ends here with positive and negative experiences that shaped me, making me the man I am today. But not everything in prison had been easy. In Gaeta, I had found many friends, but also a mean, vindictive sergeant who seemed to enjoy provoking me, looking for any pretext to report me and add months to my sentence. I endured his abuses with patience, gritting my teeth, knowing that sooner or later I would prevail. And so it was. Once out of prison, I couldn't resist. I told him off, making it clear why he had been so cruel, since I had never done anything to him. I tried to forget that man, to leave him behind, hoping that from then on life would reserve better days for me, far from the shadow of prison and human malice.